Prime Minister is worse than the old Prime Minister. I haven't read his book, Values, but if one of his values is keeping oil and gas in the ground and he thinks Alberta can operate on wind and solar and battery power, he's got another thing coming. I would certainly hope that the new Prime Minister has taken the time to read our Constitution. And I would direct him to pay specific attention to Section 92A, which gives the province, not the federal government, the exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development. And make no mistake, Alberta will do whatever it takes to shield our economy from the Liberals' growth-killing lunacy. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to be here with Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, and Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery. We're announcing that government will introduce amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act to protect essential infrastructure, which in turn protects Alberta's economy and its people. Some amendments are focused on the southern border. Earlier this year, we created a 2-kilometer deep zone in Alberta's side of the Canada-US border and deployed the interdiction patrol team to secure it. Now we're moving that zone into the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, so the definition of essential infrastructure is listed in one place. Alone, this would be just a bit of legislative housekeeping, but the amendments don't stop there. They also designate oil and gas production sites and facilities where emissions data and records are held as essential infrastructure. This amendment to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act provides an extra tool to safeguard essential infrastructure from interference, and that includes interference from Ottawa. I would certainly hope that the new Prime Minister has taken the time to read our Constitution, and I would direct him to pay specific attention to Section 92A, which gives the province, not the federal government, the exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development. Alberta will continue in its pursuit of doubling our oil and gas production to meet the growing global demand for energy. And we will not let Ottawa stand in our way. We will not tolerate the continuous unconstitutional overreaches made by the federal Liberal government. Measures like the emissions cap, the net zero electricity regs, the net zero electric vehicle mandate, and the energy industry advertising ban must be stopped now. And make no mistake, Alberta will do whatever it takes to shield our economy from the Liberals' growth-killing lunacy. These amendments we're introducing today would include denying federal workers access to our facilities and the information they contain. I will continue to fiercely and unapologetically stand up for Albertans and defend the best interest of our province, our economy, and our industry. This ongoing tariff dispute has proven now more than ever that Canada must build big and build fast to reach new global markets for export. Canadians and politicians from across the country are calling for new pipelines to be built, east, west, and north, to secure our future and end our reliance upon our southern trading partner. However, if the new Prime Minister wants to resume an old fight, well, we will. We'll fight tooth and nail. Because if we can't make these decisions and build, then it's so obvious, when it's so obviously in the national interest, then what kind of an economic future does Canada have? Today's amendments are a warning, but they are also an invitation to Ottawa. Let's talk. Let's rise to the occasion. Let's use Canada's riches to protect our nation.
So Canada is facing an unprecedented threat to its economy, potentially its sovereignty from the United States. And I wonder if you would explain why it was a priority to add measures to prevent Canadian federal government inspectors to conduct emission cap inspections or to collect data.
Well, it's both. We have had two issues that have emerged since December. So the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act, we already signaled that we would be moving in this direction because the federal government has not taken their threat of an emissions cap off the table. This is the mechanism to be able to address that problem. At the same time, we have the issue with the border that needs to be addressed. And in a separate press conference, we announced that we were creating this 2-kilometer zone. Both of them are going to be protected under the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act. When you're opening a bill, you make both changes at the same time. That's the reason.
But why this? I mean, it's the threats are coming from, the tariffs, right? That is the biggest threat. That's what a lot of people are worried about. Yet you're focusing some of your energies on the federal government.
The biggest threat.
Why is that?
Well, because the biggest threat to the Alberta economy has been the past 10 years of Liberal government that cancelled $176 billion worth of investment. We continue to face threats, whether it's tanker ban off the West Coast, Bill C-69, which has still not been passed, net zero power regs, net zero cars, net zero buildings, methane caps, emissions caps. If they continue doing that, it'll crush our economy. So I would say that we face a dual threat. Yes, we have to deal with the tariffs, but we also equally have to deal with a federal Liberal government that has tried to crush our economy for the past 10 years. And we're just not going to let them do that anymore, especially now that we're seeing an unprecedented interest in trying to get pipelines built. East, west, and north. And so this is our signal to the federal government, especially since even with the new prime minister, still seems to be very enthusiastic about taking over our tier program and emissions caps and carbon pricing and what that would mean. We're just letting him know this is our business. Section 92A of the Constitution gives us the right to manage our resources, and we're going to assert that that includes the emission data that comes from those resources and the installations that we manage.
Thanks, Michelle. We'll go to Lisa, then to Shay.
Thanks. I'm hoping you can just clarify something, because when we asked during the tech briefing, they directed these questions to you, which was kind of odd because it seems to me like a very technical question. How does the reporting on emissions data work currently in the private sector? Like, does the current emissions reporting process necessarily involve federal officials needing to physically go into these private facility, or would banning these federal employees not affect emissions reporting in any way practically?
Well, this is part of the issue, is that we don't have a single source of truth for emissions data. We found that when we were looking at our methane emissions. By our calculation, which is looking at source materials, they had reduced their emissions 45% from 2005 levels 2 years early. The federal government hired some outside organization to do some aerial scanning, and they came up with a different number. And so if we're going to have these kinds of disputes, we know that there needs to be a single source of truth when it comes to actual on-site data, and we're going to collect that, and then we'll make sure that it is shared. But we believe that because the federal government has come up with different numbers at different times for their own purposes, we think that we actually need to get real data. And because we're the ones on the ground, we'll be the ones able to do that work.
So this bill doesn't explicitly ban emissions data reporting by private companies to the federal government.
They will report to us. It's our data, and then we will report to the federal government. Remember, the energy companies, especially since we own the resource and we permit the resource, they develop the resource on our behalf. And so in doing so, we have an obligation to collect the data, and we'll report it to the federal government. But
that still doesn't answer, like, is this currently happening? Like, is this a hypothetical ban on if sometime in the future the federal government decides to send officials into the Suncor offices in Calgary? Like, this is a hypothetical ban of something that isn't even happening?
I don't know if it's hypothetical. I mean, we observed when they were wanting to do water testing that they were going onto people's property in Saskatchewan and doing water testing as a way of trying to, I think, develop some pretext for new emissions data they were going to come in with on fertilizer. And the Saskatchewan government did something quite similar in saying federal agents are not going to be allowed to just show up on people's private land to start testing their dugouts and water. And so this has already been demonstrated in the past that there have been issues, and we just are anticipating that if there are future issues, we're closing that door. The emissions data, we have to remember the other part of it is the government has made it illegal for companies to celebrate their emissions reduction. The Bill C-59 I referenced, they're not allowed to proactively talk about their positive progress that they're making on emissions because it's called greenwashing, and then they could also ultimately face charges. So the entity that is shielded from those laws are the provincial government. So they've actually put us into a position that if we want to be able to collect and report emissions data, we have to collect it ourselves, and we have to be able to report it ourselves. So that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Lisa. And Michelle, we're going to go to Shay. You've already had 2 questions.
What happens if a company doesn't comply?
Well, we license them, so they're going to.
There's nothing, I don't see anything in here that would
we have the
suggest that there's a penalty for them.
Well, we can make that a condition of us doing the leases. So there's lots that you can do, there's lots that you can do in regulation.
Retroactively?
Well, but we intend to enforce the law, and I would think that the companies are probably going to be pretty happy with the fact that we're willing to take this reporting obligation off their hands. They'll probably be quite happy that because we will have a government-approved source of information that perhaps they'll be able to then talk about, they'll be able to cite us when we're talking about our emissions reduction success. So the federal government has put us into a box, and we're finding a way to be able to make sure that we're collecting the data and able to report the data with the rules that they put in place.